My name is Irene, and I'm just a simple girl from a modest family. I graduated from college and started working as a nurse at City General Hospital. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved helping people and making a difference in their lives. On that fateful day, I was rushing through the emergency room, arms full of supplies, when the doors burst open. 2 paramedics wheeled in a stretcher, and on it lay a man in a torn leather jacket and shattered motorcycle helmet. "What happened?" I asked, immediately setting down my load and moving to assist. "Rich boy on a fancy bike lost control," one of the paramedics grunted. "Hit a guardrail. Lucky his gear held up, or he'd be in worse shape." Dr. Thompson, the attending physician, hurried over. "Irene, I need your help here." We worked quickly, removing the man's protective gear and assessing his injuries. Despite the severity of the crash, he seemed to have escaped with only a broken arm and some nasty bruises. As we cut away his shirt, I couldn't help but notice his toned physique and the expensive watch on his wrist. Where am I?" the man groaned, regaining consciousness. "You're at City General," I told him softly. "You've been in an accident, but you're going to be okay." His eyes fluttered open, revealing startling blue irises. He looked at me, dazed, then managed a weak smile. "An angel," he mumbled, before passing out again. I felt my cheeks flush and quickly busied myself with preparing his drip. "Looks like you've got an admirer, Irene," Dr. Thompson chuckled. "This is Jake Thornton, son of Richard Thornton. You know, the guy who owns half the city?" Over the next few days, I found myself assigned to Jake's room more often than not. He was healing well, but his cocky attitude was beginning to grate on my nerves. "Hey, Nurse Angel," he'd call out whenever I entered. "Come to make my day brighter?" I'd roll my eyes, trying to hide my blush. "I'm here to check your vitals, Mr. Thornton. Nothing more." Despite his arrogance, there was something about Jake that intrigued me. He was more than just a rich boy with a pretty face. When he thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch him reading complex financial reports or speaking fluent Mandarin on his phone. On the day of his discharge, I felt an unexpected pang of sadness. I told myself it was ridiculous, he was just another patient, and an annoying one at that. "Well, Nurse Angel," Jake said as he gathered his things, "I guess this is goodbye." "Take care, Mr. Thornton," I replied professionally. "Try to stay off motorcycles for a while." A week after Jake's discharge, I was going about my usual routine at the hospital. It was a quiet afternoon, and I was updating patient charts at the nurse's station when I heard a familiar voice. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Nurse Angel. Have you seen her?" I looked up, startled to see Jake Thornton standing there, a bouquet of flowers in his hand and that cocky grin on his face. He was dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Mr. Thornton," I said, feeling my cheeks warm. "What are you doing here? Is everything all right with your arm?" He chuckled. "Please, call me Jake. And my arm's fine, thanks to your excellent care. These are for you, by the way." He handed me the flowers. I accepted them awkwardly, aware of my coworkers' curious stares. "Thank you, but why?" "Because I'm asking you out on a date," he said bluntly. "And I'm hoping these might persuade you to say yes." Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. "Okay, one dinner. But that's it." Jake's face lit up. "Great. I'll pick you up at 8. Wear something nice." As he strode out of the hospital, leaving me standing there with a bouquet of expensive flowers, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd just gotten myself into. That night, I agonized over what to wear. My closet was full of practical clothes for work, nothing suitable for a date with someone like Jake Thornton. I finally settled on a simple black dress, the only one I owned. At 8 o'clock sharp, a sleek black car pulled up outside my modest apartment building. Jake stepped out, looking like he'd just walked off a magazine cover in his tailored suit. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes appreciative as he opened the car door for me. The restaurant he took me to was the kind of place I'd only ever seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers, soft piano music, waiters in tuxedos, it was all so overwhelming. "Relax," Jake said, noticing my discomfort. "It's just dinner." But it wasn't just dinner. It was the beginning of something I never could have anticipated. As we talked, I discovered that beneath his cocky exterior, Jake was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly down-to-earth. He told me about his work as a financial director in his father's company, and I found myself sharing stories about my life and my passion for nursing. "You know," Jake said as we were finishing dessert, "I've dated a lot of women, but I've never met anyone quite like you, Irene." I laughed. "I'm sure you say that to all the girls." "No," he said, his tone serious. "I mean it. You're real. Genuine. It's refreshing." As he drove me home that night, I realized that I was in dangerous territory. But when he kissed me goodnight, soft and sweet, all my reservations melted away. And as I watched his car disappear into the night, I knew that my life was never going to be the same again. The weeks that followed were like a dream. Jake and I started dating regularly, and I found myself falling harder for him with each passing day. But reality had a way of intruding on our fairy tale. The first time Jake took me to meet his parents, I knew immediately that they disapproved of me. "So, Irene," Jake's mother, Elizabeth Thornton, said coolly, "Jake tells us you're a nurse?" I nodded, trying to hide my nervousness. "Yes, at City General." "How quaint," she replied, her tone making it clear she thought it was anything but. Jake's father, Richard, barely looked up from his newspaper. "And your family? What do they do?" "My father's a retired police officer, and my mother's a teacher," I said proudly. Elizabeth exchanged a look with her husband that spoke volumes. It was clear they thought I wasn't good enough for their son. As we left that night, Jake squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Don't worry about them," he said. "They'll come around eventually." But I wasn't so sure. The disapproval of Jake's parents cast a shadow over our relationship, one that I couldn't quite shake. Despite this, Jake and I grew closer. He showered me with affection and gifts, taking me to places I'd only ever dreamed of. But I never felt comfortable in his world of wealth and privilege. I was always acutely aware of how different we were. One night, after a particularly lavish date, I confronted Jake about it. "Why me?" I asked. "You could have any woman you want. Someone from your world. Why choose a simple nurse?" Jake cupped my face in his hands. "Because you're real, Irene. You're not with me for my money or my name. You see me for who I really am." His words touched me deeply, and I pushed my doubts aside. I loved Jake, and he loved me. Wasn't that all that mattered? 6 months into our relationship, Jake proposed. It wasn't a grand, elaborate affair, just the two of us, on the rooftop of my apartment building under the stars. It was perfect. We decided on a simple ceremony, much to the dismay of Jake's parents. But Jake stood firm, insisting that it was our day, not theirs. As I walked down the aisle, seeing Jake's beaming face, I felt like my heart might burst with happiness. This was the beginning of our forever. After the wedding, we moved into Jake's luxury apartment. It was bigger than any place I'd ever lived, with a view of the city that took my breath away. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," Jake said, scooping me up in his arms as we crossed the threshold. I giggled, still not used to my new name. "I love you, Mr. Thornton." Married life with Jake started off beautifully. We settled into a routine in our luxurious apartment, and I continued working part-time at the hospital. A few months after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. Jake was overjoyed when I told him the news. "We're going to be parents," he exclaimed, spinning me around in our living room. "I can't wait to meet our little one." The pregnancy was relatively easy, and 9 months later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. We named her Lily. Jake was by my side throughout the delivery, holding my hand and encouraging me. To my surprise, Jake's parents seemed to soften a bit after Lily was born. They doted on their granddaughter, showering her with gifts and attention. However, their attitude towards me remained cool and distant. At least you managed to give Jake an heir, Elizabeth said during one of their visits, her tone a mix of approval and condescension. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that Lily deserved to have a relationship with her grandparents, regardless of how they treated me. As the months passed, I noticed subtle changes in Jake. He started working longer hours at his father's company, often coming home late and exhausted. Our conversations became shorter, more superficial. He'd ask me to prepare his suits and shine his shoes, but rarely inquired about my day or how I was feeling. One evening, as I was putting Lily to bed, Jake came home later than usual. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. "Working late," he replied tersely. "There's a big merger coming up. I need to be prepared." I nodded, unconvinced. "I made dinner. It's in the fridge if you want to heat it up." Jake waved his hand dismissively. "I already ate at the office." This became our new normal. Jake would come home late, barely acknowledge me or Lily, and retreat to his home office. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always had an excuse. "I'm doing this for us, Irene," he'd say. "For our future. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under." I felt a growing distance between us, a chasm I didn't know how to bridge. The man I married, the one who had swept me off my feet, seemed to be disappearing before my eyes. One day, I received an unexpected call from Elizabeth, Jake's mother. "Irene," she said, her voice cold and disapproving. "I hope you realize you're not fulfilling your duties as the wife of a financial director." Confused and hurt, I asked, "What do you mean?" "You didn't even bother to come to the corporate party last night," she replied. "Though perhaps it's for the best. You would have stood out among the gorgeous women there, and not in a good way." My heart sank. I hadn't known about any corporate party. Jake hadn't mentioned it to me. That evening, when Jake came home, I confronted him. "Why didn't you invite me to the corporate party?" Jake's face hardened. "Irene, let's be honest. You're too simple for those events. I'd be embarrassed to have you there." His words cut deep, confirming my worst fears. The man I loved, the one who had once called me real and genuine, now found me embarrassing. The weeks following Jake's cruel words were tense. We barely spoke. I threw myself into caring for Lily and my work at the hospital, trying to ignore the growing pit in my stomach. One evening, Jake called to say he was staying late at work again. I decided to use the quiet time to clean up a bit. As I tidied his home office, I noticed his computer was on, the screen glowing softly in the dim room. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the mouse. I knew I shouldn't, but something compelled me to look. To my surprise, the computer wasn't password protected. With a shaky hand, I opened his email. What I found shattered my world. There, in black and white, was an email exchange between Jake and a woman named Vanessa. As I read through their correspondence, my heart pounded in my chest. They weren't just coworkers, they were lovers. They mocked me, calling me a hen, a fool, a redneck without taste. Jake praised Vanessa's skills in bed, while dismissing me as dull and unattractive. With trembling hands, I copied all the correspondence I could find onto a USB drive. I needed proof, something concrete to confront Jake with. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as Jake's words echoed in my mind. When he finally came home the next morning, I was waiting for him in the living room, Lily asleep in her crib. "We need to talk," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I know about Vanessa." His face paled for a moment, before a smirk settled on his lips. "Come on, Irene. Did you really think someone like me would be satisfied with someone like you? Vanessa is everything you're not: beautiful, sophisticated, amazing in bed." Each word was like a knife to my heart. "I'm your wife," I whispered. "The mother of your child." "And that's all you'll ever be," he sneered. "I'm not giving up Vanessa. You'll just have to deal with it." In that moment, something inside me snapped. "No," I said firmly. "I won't deal with it. This marriage is over, Jake." His smirk faltered. "You can't leave me. You have nowhere to go, no money of your own. I'd rather be poor and alone than stay with a cheating bastard like you, I spat. I rushed to Lily's room, scooped her up, and grabbed the pre-packed bag I'd prepared earlier. As I headed for the door, Jake called out. You'll regret this, Irene. I'll make sure of it. I turned to face him one last time. No, Jake. You're the one who's going to regret this. With those words, I walked out of our luxury apartment, my daughter in my arms and my heart in pieces. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done being Jake Thornton's fool. The taxi pulled up to my parents' modest home, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. My mother opened the door before I could even knock, concern etched on her face. Irene, what's wrong, sweetheart? She asked, taking in my tear-stained face and Lily in my arms. Mom, I choked out. Jake, he's been cheating on me. My father appeared behind her, his expression hardening. That bastard, he muttered, ushering us inside. Over the next few hours, I poured out the whole sordid story to my parents. They were furious but supportive, insisting that Lily and I stay with them as long as we needed. But Jake wasn't content with just ending our marriage. He wanted to destroy me completely. I was served with court papers. He was suing for full custody of Lily, claiming I was an unfit mother. The allegations in the lawsuit made me sick. Jake painted me as unstable, neglectful, an alcoholic who cheated on him. Every word was a lie, but I knew how powerful the Thorntons were. My saving grace came in the form of the USB drive I'd taken from Jake's computer. In court, his smug expression faltered as my lawyer presented the evidence. The judge, a no-nonsense woman, saw right through his lies. In the end, I was granted primary custody of Lily, with Jake ordered to pay a hefty amount in child support and alimony. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. A few weeks later, as I was settling into life at my parents' house, a sleek car pulled up outside. Jake stepped out, followed by a stunning woman I assumed was Vanessa. I'm here to see my daughter, Jake demanded as I opened the door. Before I could respond, Vanessa pushed past me into the house. Her nose wrinkled as she looked around. My God, Jake, she said loudly, this place is like a homeless shelter. And these old people? They're practically worthless. I saw red. How dare she insult my parents, who had welcomed me with open arms when I had nowhere else to go? Get out, I hissed, my voice shaking with rage. Both of you, get out of my house right now. Jake's face twisted with anger. You can't keep me from my child, Irene. I'll take her from you, just wait and see. As I slammed the door in their faces, I knew this wasn't over. Jake and Vanessa wouldn't stop until they'd taken everything from me. I needed to fight back. That night, I called my father's old police buddy, now a private investigator, named Frank. I need dirt on Jake and his new girlfriend, I told him. Anything you can find. Frank's investigation yielded more than I could have imagined. Vanessa, it turned out, had a colorful past as an escort, living off rich men's money. But that wasn't all. She was currently embezzling from Jake's company and selling insider information to their competitors. Even more shocking, Frank uncovered evidence that Jake himself was far from innocent. He'd been siphoning money from the company into offshore accounts for years. I had the power to bring Jake and Vanessa's world crashing down around them. But I wouldn't act rashly. No, I would bide my time, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash this information for maximum impact. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. I was surprised to see Elizabeth Thornton's name on the caller ID. With some trepidation, I answered. Irene, Elizabeth's cold voice, came through the speaker. My birthday is next weekend. I expect Lily to be there. You may accompany her if you must. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, a plan forming in my mind. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. As we approached the Thornton mansion, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Richard answered the door, his face a mask of polite indifference. Ah, Irene. And little Lily, come in. The room was filled with the Thorntons' high society friends, all giving me curious looks. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Suddenly, the room fell silent as Jake entered, Vanessa on his arm. His face registered surprise at seeing me, quickly masked by a smug smile. "Everyone," he announced, "I'd like you to meet Vanessa, my fiancée and future wife." The room erupted in congratulations. Elizabeth and Richard fawned over Vanessa, showering her with compliments. "Oh, Jake," Elizabeth gushed, "Vanessa is simply wonderful. Such impeccable breeding and education. A much better match for you than, well." She glanced dismissively in my direction. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. But now was not the time to lose control. I waited until the excitement died down, then slowly stood up. "I have something to say," I announced, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. I pulled out the folder from my purse and turned to address the room. "You all seem very impressed with Vanessa. But do you know who she really is?" The room fell silent as I began to reveal the truth. I explained how Vanessa was living under a false identity, how she had no real education, and how she had worked as an escort, sleeping with rich men for money. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Vanessa's face had gone pale, while Jake looked like he might be sick. But I wasn't finished. "And that's not all," I continued. "Vanessa has been selling company secrets to your competitors. She's been embezzling money from the company accounts Jake so trustingly gave her access to." Richard Thornton's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Is this true?" he thundered, turning to Jake and Vanessa. Before either could respond, I delivered the final blow. "And Jake? Jake has been transferring company funds to offshore accounts for years." The room erupted into chaos. Richard grabbed Vanessa by the arm, practically dragging her to the door. "Get out of my house, you deceitful witch," he roared. "I'll see you in court for this." He then rounded on Jake, his hand connecting with Jake's face in a resounding slap. "You're fired, you ungrateful scoundrel. How dare you steal from your own family?" In the midst of the pandemonium, I calmly picked up Lily and headed for the door. As I passed Jake, who was holding his reddened cheek, I paused. "I told you you'd regret this, Jake," I said softly. "Goodbye." In the weeks following the explosive revelation at Elizabeth's birthday party, my life took yet another unexpected turn. One afternoon, I received a call from Richard Thornton. "Irene," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "Elizabeth and we'd like to speak with you. In person, if possible." Curious and slightly apprehensive, I agreed to meet them at a quiet cafe the next day. As I walked in, I saw them sitting at a corner table, looking older and more subdued than I'd ever seen them. "Irene," Elizabeth began as I sat down, "we owe you an apology. A big one." Richard nodded solemnly. "We misjudged you terribly. You saved our company, our reputation. We can never thank you enough." Over the next hour, we talked more openly than we ever had before. They shared their regrets, their shock at Jake's betrayal, and their hope for a fresh start. By the time we left the cafe, a tentative peace had been established between us. Life continued to evolve rapidly. Vanessa was arrested for fraud and embezzlement, facing not just a hefty fine but potential jail time. Jake, stripped of his position and his fancy apartment by his parents, left the state in disgrace. He would call occasionally to speak with Lily, but our interactions remained cold and distant. One day, Richard and Elizabeth invited me to their office. "We have something for you," Richard said, handing me an envelope. Inside was the deed to a small but lovely apartment in a nice part of town. "It's yours," Elizabeth explained. "A thank you for saving the company. And a new start for you and Lily." I was overwhelmed by their generosity. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept it," Richard said warmly. "And there's more. We'd like to pay for your education. You mentioned once that you dreamed of becoming a doctor?" Tears welled up in my eyes. "A cardiologist, actually. But I never thought." "Now you can," Elizabeth smiled. Consider it an investment in our granddaughter's future. And so, at 30 years old, I found myself embarking on a new journey. Balancing single motherhood with medical school was challenging, but I was determined to succeed. Lily and I settled into our new apartment, building a life that was entirely our own.